You didn't lose me, you just ran out of access. Now sit with that, because that one sentence hits your enemies like a glass table from the top rope. They spent so long trying to name you, shame you, frame you, that they never noticed the real shift happening right under their noses. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped auditioning for rooms that were never built for you. You stopped bleeding in public for people who clapped when you were hurting. And the moment you did that, my dear chosen ones, the entire dynamic flipped. Welcome in, not as a guest, not as a backup, not as someone who's too much or too quiet or too intense, depending on which version of you made them feel insecure that day. Welcome in as what you actually are, the person whose presence rewires the room. The person they tried to reduce into a label because it's easier to dismiss you than to admit you intimidate them. Because, let's be honest, chosen ones, the insults were never descriptions, they were confessions. Too mysterious really meant, I can't control you. Too quiet really meant, I can't read you. Too intense really meant, you make me feel small. And here's the part your enemies hate the most. You didn't become powerful by winning. You became powerful by walking away. That's the move they can't copy, because their entire identity is built on reactions. They need attention, like a phone needs battery. They need drama, like a fire needs oxygen. You learn to live without needing applause. You learn to function without being understood. You learn that silence isn't absence, it's authority. Maybe you're wondering right now, why does it feel like people switch up the moment I stop chasing? Because chasing made them comfortable. Chasing made you predictable. When you were always available, always explaining, always giving second chances, you were easy to manage. But when you pulled back, when you stopped sending paragraphs, when you stopped fighting for a seat at tables where you were being used as decoration, you didn't just leave, you removed the leash, and the dog that thought it owned the chain panicked. Let me make it simple, chosen ones. Your enemies didn't want you gone, they wanted you controllable. They wanted you close enough to access, far enough to disrespect. They wanted you humble enough to tolerate crumbs. They wanted the old you, the version that tried to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. The version that took disrespect personally instead of taking notes. The version that confused loyalty with self-sacrifice. But you changed, quietly, like a storm forming with a blue sky face, like a chess player who stops arguing and starts positioning. And while they were out there pretending they won, you were in the background becoming the kind of person they can't argue with anymore. Not because you're louder, because you're done. And done is terrifying to anyone who built their power on your reaction. Here's another line that makes them choke on their ego. I didn't become cold, I became exact. Before we move any further, pause with me for a moment. If this message is hitting you where words usually don't reach, support this work by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Every like tells the algorithm this message matters. Every subscription gives us the fuel to keep showing up with content that's sharp, honest, and life-shifting. We don't do noise here. We bring clarity, strength, and energy for people who are rebuilding themselves in silence. Your support keeps these stories coming, keeps this space alive, and helps us reach others who need this reminder right now. Chosen ones, this is the power of being chosen. Not in some exclusive club way, not in a mythical way, but in the real world, psychological way. You're chosen because you see what others ignore. You notice patterns, you feel shifts, you read the room without needing a spotlight. You don't just survive pressure, you metabolize it. You don't just take pain, you convert it into precision. And when you finally stop playing their game, they don't celebrate. They spiral, because they can't stand not knowing what you're thinking, not knowing what you've realized, not knowing whether your silence is peace or preparation. They start rewatching old conversations like detectives at a crime scene. They replay your tone, your pauses, your okay, your sure, your calm exits. They zoom in on details like they're trying to find the exact frame where you stopped being theirs to manipulate. And that's where this story gets savage, chosen ones, because your enemies didn't just gossip about you. They didn't just stalk your socials from fake accounts. They didn't just ask mutuals how you've been. No. They did what insecure people do when they feel outclassed. They hired help. Real help. 3 specialists. 3 angles, 1 obsession, figure you out, a psychic to read you, a detective to track you, a CEO to measure you like a strategy. And the funny part? They thought they were investigating you like you were a problem to solve. They didn't realize they were stepping into a room that would expose them. Because chosen ones aren't puzzles. Chosen ones are pressure tests. So if you're sitting there thinking, why do they still watch me if they act like they don't care? Here's the answer. Because your silence became the loudest thing in their life. It's the unanswered question that keeps them up. It's the locked door they can't pick. It's the mirror they keep avoiding, because every time they look at you, they see what they refused to become. Now do me one thing. Chosen ones, stamp your presence. Like the video, subscribe, and drop 777 in the comments, not as a ritual, not as a belief, just as a signal, a signature, a way of saying, I'm here, I'm locked in, and I'm not shrinking for anyone. Because next, we step into that room, and you're going to see exactly what happened when 3 professionals tried to define someone who refuses to be contained. And before we step into the room where everything changes, pause right here with me. If this message feels uncomfortably accurate, if it feels like someone finally put words to what you've been living in silence, then support this work. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop 77 in the comments as a signal that you're locked in. Your support keeps this kind of sharp, focused, life-shifting content alive. And now, chosen one, steady yourself. Because from here on, we move step by step into what happened when a psychic, a detective, and a CEO tried to figure you out and realized they were never ready. Number 1, the moment they realized you were never who they thought you were. She looked for a signature and found a shockwave. They didn't discover your weakness, they triggered their own fear. Now settle in, my dear chosen ones, because this is where the illusion breaks for good. This is the moment your enemies realized they weren't circling someone fragile, confused, or lost. They were orbiting something unstable in the best way possible, unstable to their control, their expectations, their narratives. Funny how they were so quick to call you broken, yet they're the ones whose hands start shaking whenever your name enters the room. That irony alone should tell you everything. When they brought her in, it wasn't curiosity. It was desperation. They wanted confirmation. They wanted permission to believe the story they told themselves about you, that you were damaged, that you were predictable, that you were just reacting, not transforming. They wanted someone to read you so they could finally put you back in a box small enough to manage. Because insecure people don't fear chaos. They fear what they can't frame. So there she sat, surrounded by her tools, her rituals, her methods polished from years of working with ordinary emotional patterns. She expected the usual blueprint, the clear origin of pain, the obvious wounds, the timeline that explains why someone behaves the way they do. That's how most people are. Linear, traceable, explainable. But the moment she turned her attention toward you, that framework collapsed. Chosen ones, this is important. She wasn't confused because you were unclear. She was unsettled because you were too clear. There was no straight line to follow, no single trauma to point at, no obvious collapse. What she encountered instead was motion, constant motion, like trying to study the ocean by grabbing a handful of water. You weren't showing up as a fixed state. You were showing up as momentum. She reset, tried again. focused harder, and that's when the discomfort set in, because the deeper she looked, the less familiar you became. You didn't read like someone stuck in the past. You didn't carry yourself like someone waiting to be healed. You felt like someone who had already passed through multiple versions of themselves and kept moving. That's when the room shifted. That's when her confidence cracked. You know those questions that sometimes surface when everything is quiet. Why do I feel older than my age? Why do I feel like I've lived several lives already? She felt that too. She couldn't line up your inner state with your external timeline. Your experiences didn't match your years. Your responses didn't match your history. It was like trying to calculate a storm using a ruler. And then came the moment your enemies weren't prepared for, the verdict they never wanted. She said the thing that froze the room. You had endured things that should have ended you. Situations that break people permanently. Pressure that turns most into shadows of themselves. And instead of collapsing, you adapted. Instead of disappearing, you sharpened. Every hit didn't weaken you, it recalibrated you. Imagine being the one who tried to sabotage you and hearing that. Imagine realizing that every time they tried to hurt you, they were unknowingly upgrading you. Their absence forced you to grow. Their silence trained your independence. Their disrespect refined your boundaries. What they thought were wounds had already turned into armor. Chosen ones, this is where the power lies. Not in being untouched, but in being untouchable after being touched. Your scars don't leak anymore. They reflect. They don't pull you backward. They anchor you forward. And people who never face themselves can't stand standing next to someone who has. She tried to name you, tried to classify you, tried to stabilize you into something understandable. But you wouldn't hold still. One moment you felt calm, the next decisive. One moment reflective, the next detached. Not chaotic, adaptive, like lightning, present just long enough to be felt, not long enough to be captured. And that's when she understood the truth your enemies couldn't accept. Manipulation doesn't work on someone who has already outlived worse. Guilt doesn't land on someone who's already released it. Fear doesn't control someone who's already stared it down alone. You don't react the way they expect because you're no longer operating from the same survival software. She warned them, not dramatically, quietly. The kind of warning that lands heavier than shouting. Stop watching them, because if you don't, you'll realize too late that they've been watching you the whole time. That's what scared them most, because deep down, they know you're observant. You don't rush into confrontation. You don't announce your conclusions. You notice patterns. You track behavior. You let people reveal themselves while thinking they're in control. And nothing unsettles insecure minds more than realizing the person they underestimated has already moved on mentally. While they were telling others you didn't matter, they were studying you in secret. While they were acting unbothered, they were refreshing pages, replaying conversations, analyzing pauses. While they pretended you were nothing special, they paid someone to decode your silence. In the end, she refused to continue, declined the rest of the deal, looked them in the eye and made it clear, you are operating on a level they don't belong to. Not because you're superior, but because you've been forged. You don't move like someone waiting to be saved. You move like someone who rebuilt themselves quietly and kept the blueprint private. And that's why they act strange around you now. Why their confidence flickers. Why their energy shifts when you enter a room. Because somewhere deep down, they felt what she confirmed. You were never meant to shrink. You were meant to rise, and they were never equipped to witness that without feeling exposed. Number 2, the specialist who tried to read you and left unsettled. He chased the trail and lost the shadow. You didn't disappear. You upgraded beyond their tracking system. All right, chosen one, lean in. If the first expert unsettled them, this one stripped away every last excuse they were hiding behind. This is where your enemies stopped calling you emotional, stopped calling you impulsive, stopped pretending you were just reacting. Because the man they brought in next doesn't deal in feelings or stories. He deals in evidence, patterns, timelines, cause and effect. And he couldn't even sketch your outline. They brought him in because they wanted certainty, numbers, proof, something cold and undeniable that would finally explain you away. He's the kind of man who reconstructs lives from fragments, a timestamp here, a keystroke there. He solves cases by following what people leave behind when they think no one's watching. And when your file landed on his desk, he was confident. Another complicated person, he said. Another story that would make sense once you zoomed out enough. That confidence didn't last. They gave him everything, every digital footprint you ever left, searches, messages, purchases, gaps in communication, location history. He expected a clean arc. Everyone has one. The rise, the rupture, the breakdown, the coping phase, pain followed by noise, hurt followed by reaction. That's the human pattern, except when he laid out your timeline, there was no collapse where one should have been. There was silence, not chaos, not spiraling. Silence. Chosen ones, this is where it clicked for him. Most people explode when they're hurt. They overshare. They perform their pain. They beg the world to witness their wounds. You didn't do that. You vanished. Not out of weakness, but out of precision. You didn't disappear to escape. You disappeared to recalibrate, like a system going offline for maintenance. He stared at the data for weeks, waiting for the emotional breakdown to show itself. It never did. Betrayal should have triggered erratic behavior. Instead, there was restraint. Loss should have created instability. Instead, there was control. Every place where a reaction should have been, there was adjustment. He wasn't watching someone fall apart. He was watching someone shed layers. That's when he said the line that made the room uncomfortable. Your silence wasn't collapse. It was reconfiguration. You weren't running from pain. You were dismantling old versions of yourself that no longer served you. And when you re-emerged, you didn't come back softer or louder. You came back sharper. Ask yourself something, chosen one. Haven't you wondered why you pull back when things hurt? Why you go quiet instead of dramatic? Why you seem to come back stronger after every loss? He saw that pattern too, and it scared him, because it didn't match any documented emotional model. You weren't healing by talking. You were healing by transforming. Every time he thought he had you mapped, you changed lanes. Every time he predicted behavior, you sidestepped it. He described it like trying to follow smoke through a locked room. You weren't leaving clues. You were leaving decoys. You healed in motion, not stillness, under pressure, not comfort, without witnesses. Then he examined how you communicate, and that's when your enemies really started to sweat. Your words weren't random. They weren't emotional spills. They were layered, purposeful. Every message tested something. Every pause revealed something. Every response measured the other person. Not in a manipulative way, but in a learned way, like someone who understands that words can be twisted, used, weaponized. Most people talk to be liked, to be seen, to be validated. You talk to learn. You observe how people behave when they're bored, insecure, losing control. You don't argue. You collect information. You don't chase explanations. You watch patterns. And the detective called it what it was, the most sophisticated emotional self-defense system he'd ever seen. Then came the sentence that dismantled your enemies completely. Whoever hurt this person didn't create a rival. They created an evolution. Imagine sitting there thinking you broke someone only to hear you rebuilt them into something untouchable. Imagine realizing that every attempt to manipulate you only taught you more about human behavior, that every lie sharpened your perception, that every disrespect refined your boundaries. His conclusion was brutal in its calmness. You can't guilt them, you can't manipulate them, you can't isolate them, you can't predict them, not because you're damaged, but because you've grown beyond the framework they're still using. He closed the file, walked out, ignored the money. Some cases aren't meant to be solved. Some aren't puzzles. Some are warnings. You weren't unpredictable because you were broken. You were unpredictable because you evolved. You weren't silent because you were afraid. You were silent because you were strategic. And that's when they understood why they fear you now. Number 3. The analyst who tracked everything except you. He came to measure you and discovered he was standing on the wrong scale. You can't dominate someone who no longer negotiates with fear. Chosen one, this is where the story stops being subtle and starts cutting deep. This isn't intuition anymore. This isn't perception or pattern reading. This is raw power, the kind that runs boardrooms, decides outcomes, and ends careers without raising its voice. And this is exactly where they made their biggest mistake. They dragged your name into the arena of leverage and control, thinking this would finally be the place where you'd fold. Instead, this is where the illusion of their superiority collapsed. The CEO walked in with the posture of a man who's used to people shrinking when he speaks, a man who dissects personalities the way surgeons dissect tissue, clean, detached, efficient. He's trained to spot weakness instantly, dependency, need, hunger. The quiet desperation people carry when they want something too badly. That's how he wins. That's how he controls. And he assumed you'd be no different. They handed him everything. The incomplete files, the gaps the detective couldn't fill, the notes the psychic refused to finish. They wanted him to do what he does best, find the pressure point, the crack, the leverage, the thing that would make you predictable again, because in their minds, everyone bends if you apply the right force. But Chosen One, when he started pulling those strings, nothing moved. No spike in fear, no emotional leak, no defensive reaction, no desperation. And that's when confusion set in, because you didn't behave like someone protecting something fragile. You behaved like someone who had already lost everything once and survived it. That alone changes the entire equation. He approached you like a takeover, mapping motivations, scanning for attachment, looking for incentives, rewards, threats, anything that could be used as currency. That's when it hit him. You weren't chasing status. You weren't hungry for approval. You weren't clinging to image. You weren't operating from fear of loss. You were operating from clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Most people break when you threaten their comfort. You didn't flinch. Most people panic when stability is questioned. You got calmer. Most people negotiate when pressured. You disengaged. That's when he realized you weren't insecure. You were independent. And independence terrifies anyone who survives by influence. He checked your finances expecting vulnerability. He found self-sufficiency. He checked your relationships expecting attachment. He found boundaries. He checked your decisions expecting hesitation. He found precision. You weren't avoiding people. You were selective. You weren't disconnected. You were intentional. You weren't cold. You were finished paying emotional taxes to unworthy systems. Chosen ones, this is the question many of you silently carry. Why do people grow uneasy once they get close to me? This is why. They sense you don't need them. And nothing destabilizes a manipulative mind faster than realizing their presence isn't required. Then came the moment that humiliated everyone in the room. He leaned back, looked at the files, and said the sentence they never expected. If he was smart, he wouldn't be investigating you. He'd be hiring you. That one line shattered their fantasy. They wanted him to expose you. He validated you. He saw something they couldn't name. Resilience that wasn't learned, but lived. Strategy born from survival, not theory. Intuition sharpened by betrayal, not training. You can't teach someone how to rebuild themselves after everything collapses. You can't teach someone how to trust their judgment after being deceived repeatedly. You can't train the kind of awareness that comes from watching plans fail and still moving forward. You didn't study resilience, you became it. And then he delivered the line that still echoes in their heads. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one chasing power, it's the one who doesn't need it. Let that settle, chosen one. True danger doesn't scream, it doesn't posture, it stands still. He searched for your emotional weak spots and found rebuilt territory, not emptiness, completion. He searched for fear and found acceptance, someone who had already made peace with loss. He searched for pressure points and found composure. You don't escalate under threat, you stabilize, and that's why they can't scare you. You already faced the worst version of yourself and came out intact. His warning was quiet, but lethal. Don't control them. Don't compete with them. Don't provoke them. Because people like you don't retaliate emotionally. You outmaneuver. By the time someone realizes they crossed you, the consequences are already unfolding on their own. You're not chaotic. You're calculated. You're not reactive. You're deliberate. You're not dramatic. You're decisive. They thought you were emotional. You were evaluating. They thought you were attached. You were deciding who deserved access. That's why people regret losing you late. It takes time for them to realize you weren't fragile. You were focused. He closed the file, declined the payment, declined the follow-ups, straightened his suit and said the line that ended it all. You're not someone to manage. You're someone they should have respected. And with that, he walked out. 3 experts, 3 failures. And you weren't even trying. They didn't uncover your weakness. They exposed their own. Number 4, the authority figure who tried to measure you and failed. When the room meant to define you became the place, they fell apart. You weren't the variable they miscalculated. You were the limit they exposed. Chosen one, welcome to the moment your enemies never wanted you to witness. This is the scene behind the curtain, the closed-door meeting where confidence dissolved, authority cracked, and an entire operation short-circuited under the weight of one truth they couldn't process. You were never easy to replace, explain, or erase. They said you were ordinary, disposable, temporary, and yet here they were, 3 experts with decades of mastery, unable to even agree on what you were to their ego. Picture it clearly. The lights overhead buzzing like a system under strain. A long table buried in files, charts, notes, all stamped with your name. This was supposed to be the moment of clarity for them. Instead, it became the moment everything glitched. The psychic entered first, and you could see it in her hands, the subtle tremor of someone who looked into something they weren't trained to face. She placed her folder down carefully, almost cautiously, like your presence alone might cause it to open itself. Then came the detective, dragging timelines that contradicted each other so badly they looked like they belonged to different realities. Nothing lined up. Nothing behaved the way it was supposed to. And finally, the CEO walked in, jaw tight, laptop tucked under his arm like a weapon he no longer trusted. The moment he sat down, he snapped it shut, hard, not because of anger, but because something in him already knew the data wouldn't save him. Silence filled the room in that specific way it does when confidence dies quietly. The detective tapped his pen once, twice, then stopped. Every explanation collapsed the second he tried to speak it out loud. The psychic finally broke the tension, her voice low, careful. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she asked. And just like that, embarrassment became audible. 3 experts, 3 disciplines, 3 different worlds. Yet none of their conclusions matched, none of their notes aligned, none of their findings followed any accepted logic. Chosen one, this is the answer to the question you've asked yourself more times than you admit. Why do people react to me in ways I don't understand? Because even professionals can't place you inside their models. You don't fit. The psychic tried first to explain what she saw. She traced patterns with her finger, speaking like someone choosing every word carefully. They shift, she said. You can't lock them into a timeline. Every time I looked, they were different. That doesn't happen. The detective interrupted, frustrated. That makes no sense. Behavior should confirm what you saw, but it doesn't. They disappear when they should react. They evolve when they should collapse. Every emotional model says they should break, and they don't. The CEO rubbed his temples, visibly unsettled. You're both missing it, he said. This person is past leverage, past pressure, past influence. You can't negotiate with someone who has nothing left to lose. That's when the room went silent again. Because in that moment, something humiliating became obvious. Your enemies thought you were predictable. These experts had just discovered you weren't even classifiable. Unclassifiable, the detective muttered, writing the word down and circling it, leaning back like he'd just ended his own argument. The psychic shook her head. Not unclassifiable, she corrected softly. Untouchable. Her voice cracked on the last word. The CEO leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the look of someone realizing he'd been measuring the wrong metrics his entire career. Then came the first line that changed everything. You didn't bring us a human, the CEO said quietly. You brought us a turning point. The room froze, because that wasn't an assessment, it was a warning. They hired these experts to expose your weakness. Instead, all 3 returned with cautions. The psychic flipped through her notes. This doesn't match their age, background, or experience. Either they lived through things no one knows about, or they've surpassed normal limits of resilience. The detective added, I see emotional deaths followed by rebirths, but no breakdowns, just silence, then evolution. He underlined the word like it scared him. The CEO looked directly at the one who hired them. You can't control someone who doesn't fear consequences. You didn't lose them, he said. You failed to understand them. That truth dropped like ice water, because they didn't move on from you. They didn't replace you. They didn't outgrow you. They failed to categorize you, failed to predict you, failed to break you. The psychic pushed her notes forward. Their scars don't behave like scars. They behave like upgrades. The detective nodded. Their absence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The CEO added the final cut. Their heart isn't fragile. It's selective. By then, the room was heavy enough to suffocate. Not because they feared you, but because the experts feared for them. And when the final line landed, everything collapsed. This isn't a person you investigate, the CEO said. This is a person you prepare for. Silence followed. No one dared close the files. No one dared read further, because they finally understood. You weren't unpredictable. You were uncontainable. You weren't misunderstood. You were unmatched, and they never should have tried to figure you out. Number 5. The closed-door meeting, where every conclusion collapsed. They came to measure the risk and left with a warning label on themselves. You weren't flagged as dangerous. You were flagged as uncontrollable, and that terrified them. Chosen one, this was supposed to be the clean part, the clinical part. The moment they finally got to shrink you into numbers and boxes so they could breathe again. A risk score, a threat level, a neat little conclusion they could slide across the table and say, see, we understand them now. But the second this assessment began, everything tilted. Because you can't quantify someone who no longer reacts on cue. You can't chart someone who refuses to perform fear. And you definitely can't measure someone whose silence carries more weight than most people's rage. They walked in thinking you were the problem. They walked out realizing the instability wasn't you, it was the room. The first thing that unsettled them was how careful the tone became. Not dramatic, not aggressive, careful. The kind of careful reserved for things that don't announce their power. The psychic spoke first, but not with confidence, more like caution. Like someone choosing words slowly because the subject might be listening. She didn't frame you as hostile or chaotic. She described you like a force already in motion. Someone moving with momentum that doesn't need permission. Someone who doesn't strike outward because growth itself does the work. Chosen one, that alone shattered the narrative they wanted. Because enemies need you emotional. They need you reactive. They need you loud and messy so they can call you unstable. But you didn't give them that. You gave them absence, precision, control. And people who depend on chaos can't function around someone who mastered stillness. Then the detective weighed in, and this is where the tension tightened. He didn't speak in metaphors. He spoke in patterns. And what he said cut deeper than any insult. You don't lash out, you don't beg, you don't chase, you don't implode, you go quiet. And silence, he said, is only threatening to people with something to hide. Let that land, chosen one. Your enemies didn't fear your actions. They feared what your silence reflected back at them. Because when you stopped explaining, they were left alone with their motives. When you stopped reacting, their behavior echoed louder. When you stopped defending yourself, the truth stopped needing a spokesperson. And that kind of silence, it dismantles narratives without lifting a finger. You could feel the discomfort spreading in the room, the kind that makes people shift in their chairs and avoid eye contact. Because suddenly, the assessment wasn't about your danger. It was about their inability to tolerate someone who didn't need them anymore. And then came the CEO, the one who lives in leverage, pressure, and control, the one who measures people like assets or liabilities. He didn't even bother finishing the review. He closed your file and pushed it away like it carried heat. He didn't call you volatile. He didn't call you unstable. He called you resolved. Chosen one, that word matters. Resolved people don't bluff. They don't posture. They don't need dominance displays. They've already made peace with loss, which makes them immune to intimidation. And nothing scares a controlling mind more than someone who can walk away without flinching. That's when it hit your enemies all at once. The experts weren't dissecting you anymore. They were dissecting them. Their obsession, their fixation, their need to label you so they wouldn't have to face why your absence rattled them. The risk assessment quietly flipped directions. You weren't being evaluated as a threat. You were being evaluated as a mirror. And the final conclusion didn't come with a number or category. It came as a warning, delivered without drama. You are not dangerous unless provoked. But if provoked, the consequences won't look like chaos. They'll look like inevitability. That's what made the room feel small, because inevitability can't be argued with. You don't need revenge. You don't need confrontation. You don't need closure. Growth does the damage on its own. Watching someone you tried to undermine rise without you is a punishment most egos never recover from. Chosen one, this is the power they couldn't measure. You didn't threaten them. You outgrew them. You didn't attack. You detached. And detachment from people who rely on access feels like annihilation. So when they labeled the risk, the truth slipped out sideways. The real danger wasn't you. It was their inability to stop watching someone who had already moved on. And that's the kind of warning no chart can contain. Number 6. the risk evaluation that turned into a quiet warning. When the spotlight swung back and burned the ones who set it up. You weren't the problem they were studying. You were the mirror they couldn't stand to face. Chosen one, this was supposed to be their moment of clarity. The meeting where they finally proved you were the issue. The room where your silence would be labeled avoidance, your distance would be framed as weakness, your absence would be diagnosed as instability. They walked in confident, smug even, convinced this was the final chapter where your name would be underlined in red and stamped with blame. But halfway through that meeting, something deeply uncomfortable began to surface. The investigation stopped pointing at you. Every question they asked circled back to the same place. Not your behavior, not your choices, not your silence. It led straight back to the person who couldn't handle losing access to you. That's the part they never anticipated. Chosen ones, listen carefully. You didn't trigger this meltdown by attacking, arguing, or exposing anyone. You triggered it by stepping away, and nothing terrifies fragile minds more than someone who leaves without trying to be understood. Because when you walk away clean, there's no distraction left. No noise, no chaos, just reflection. And reflection is ruthless. At first, the experts tried to stay on script. They reviewed timelines. They examined interactions. They revisited moments where you stopped responding, stopped explaining, stopped showing up. But something didn't add up. There was no evidence of emotional instability, no erratic behavior, no impulsive reactions, no attempts to retaliate, no public breakdowns, no campaigns of revenge, just absence. And absence, chosen one, is only threatening to people who were feeding on your presence. The psychic felt it before anyone said it out loud. She paused, placed her hand over your file, and went quiet. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just quiet in the way someone gets when they realize the ground beneath them isn't solid. She said being near you doesn't damage people, it exposes them. Standing close to you forces people to see themselves clearly, without filters. And that's when the tension in the room spiked. Because mirrors don't flatter. Mirrors don't negotiate. Mirrors don't lie. Your enemies stiffened because suddenly they weren't hearing about your flaws. They were hearing about their own discomfort. Then the detective leaned in, tapping the table like he was trying to ground himself. He said something that landed harder than any accusation. Your silence didn't cause harm. Their guilt did. People don't fear silence unless they're afraid of what it confirms. If your quiet unsettled them, it wasn't because you disappeared. It was because they knew why you did. Chosen one, that hits deep, because silence only becomes loud when there's something unresolved screaming underneath it. And then the CEO spoke, calm, precise, no emotion. He didn't talk about you shrinking or folding. He said the exact opposite. You weren't intimidated, you were independent, and independence is devastating to people who build their worth on being needed. When you walked away, you didn't fall apart. You grew, you redirected your energy, you reclaimed your focus. And that kind of growth doesn't just bruise egos, it destroys illusions. That's when the room went cold, because suddenly no one was analyzing your psychology anymore. They were dissecting obsession, control issues, the inability to accept loss, the fear of irrelevance. The experts weren't asking, what's wrong with them? They were asking, why can't you let them go? And that's the question your enemies had been running from the entire time. Chosen ones, this is where everything flips. The realization hits that the investigation was never really about you. It was about soothing the discomfort of someone who couldn't accept that you no longer orbit them. Someone who needed a diagnosis to justify their fixation. Someone who wanted experts to validate their story instead of confronting the truth. And the truth cut deep. The final verdict wasn't delivered with anger, it was delivered with clarity. You didn't hire us to understand them. You hired us to avoid understanding yourself. That sentence alone dismantled the entire operation because it exposed the real motive behind the investigation. It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't concern, it was control withdrawal. It was the panic that comes when someone you underestimated stops playing their role. Chosen One, let this land. You didn't fail to be manageable, you succeeded in being free, and that freedom forced others to confront what they were never willing to fix in themselves. The meeting ended without resolution because there was nothing left to resolve about you. The only unresolved element in that room was the person who couldn't accept your absence as a final answer. And that's why this section matters, because it proves something powerful. You didn't escape scrutiny by defending yourself. You escaped it by becoming unbothered. You didn't win by proving them wrong. You won by no longer needing to be right. And that's the kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It just leaves people sitting in rooms they built to destroy you, realizing they were the ones under examination the entire time. Number 7. The session that exposed the real instability in the room. The gavel fell, and it wasn't your name on trial. You asked for weaknesses. You exposed your obsession. Chosen One, this was supposed to be their victory lap, the clean ending. The moment where the room nodded in agreement and someone finally slid a neat list across the table explaining you away. They expected a diagnosis, a flaw inventory, a soft spot they could press if they ever needed leverage again. What they got instead was a verdict that turned the spotlight around and burned straight through them, because the truth arrived all at once, and it didn't need theatrics. It didn't need proof stacked to the ceiling. It needed honesty. And honesty is brutal to people who built their confidence on control. You could feel the shift before a word was spoken. The air changed. The tone dropped. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was containment of them. The psychic spoke first, and that alone rattled the room because she didn't reach for notes, didn't flip pages, didn't perform. She looked past the file, past the data, past the story they wanted told, and said the sentence that ended the game. This is not prey. Simple, final. The kind of sentence that makes excuses die quietly. Chosen Ones, that word matters. Prey reacts, prey freezes, prey runs, prey bleeds publicly. You don't. You recalibrate. You withdraw. You return changed. She made it clear without raising her voice. You already moved beyond the wounds they were trying to weaponize. You didn't deny them. You integrated them. You didn't stay defined by damage. You used it as a blueprint. And people who live by dominance panic when they meet someone who can't be cornered emotionally. Then the detective closed his folder. Not slowly, not dramatically. Shut. Final. Like a door you don't knock on again. This is not a target, he said, flat and precise. Targets chase closure. Targets argue. Targets spiral. Targets break under pressure. You don't do any of that. You evolve. Every attempt to trap you refined you. Every push sharpened your awareness. Every test failed because you weren't playing the same game. You weren't reacting. You were adapting. Chosen One, here's the part that answers the questions you've been asking yourself late at night. Why does every confrontation make me clearer instead of messier? Because you're not built for constant defense. You're built for recalibration. You don't burn energy proving yourself. You conserve it, redirect it, and come back quieter, but stronger. That's not weakness, that's efficiency. And people who rely on chaos can't compute someone who thrives on restraint. Then the CEO leaned in, and this is where the verdict became irreversible. Fingers steepled, eyes steady, no emotion, just clarity. Let me be clear, he said. This is not someone you can predict or manipulate. This is an evolution. That word landed like a verdict stamped in ink. Evolution doesn't argue. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't explain itself to outdated systems. It replaces them. He paused, not for effect, but because the truth doesn't rush. If you keep watching them, provoking them, analyzing them, he continued, the consequences won't come from their anger. They'll come from their growth, and you're not ready for that. That's the line that stripped the room bare, because anger is something you can provoke and manage. Growth is not. Growth keeps moving. Growth doesn't wait for your approval. Growth leaves you behind without ceremony. That's when your enemies finally understood the humiliation of it all. They weren't investigating you. They were recording their own unraveling. Every question they asked revealed their fear. Every attempt to label you exposed their dependency on control. They wanted a list of your weaknesses and ended up staring at their own, the need to dominate what doesn't belong to them, the need to reduce what they don't understand, the need to own what was never theirs to keep. Chosen ones, this is why your silence unsettles them. This is why your absence feels louder than your presence ever did. This is why they regret things months or years later when it's too late to reach you. You didn't become untouchable by building walls. You became untouchable by removing hooks. No leverage, no bait, no emotional access points left unguarded. The final verdict didn't need applause. It didn't need repetition. It was short, cold, and absolute. Step back, stop watching, stay quiet. You're outmatched. And just like that, the narrative flipped. You weren't misunderstood. You were unmanageable. You weren't complicated. You were evolved. You weren't fragile. You were focused. And here's the quiet power they can't escape. Chosen one, you didn't threaten them. You didn't warn them. You didn't announce anything. You just kept growing. And that, more than anything else, became the sentence they couldn't appeal. Number 8. The final assessment that ended the investigation. They tried to write your ending and accidentally revealed their limits. They thought they were studying you. What they really documented was their own ceiling. Chosen one, this is where it all settles. After the noise, after the scrutiny, after the experts walked in confident and walked out shaken, one truth stands untouched and undeniable. You cannot be decoded, not simplified, not contained, not rewritten to fit someone else's comfort. They came in with pens ready to label you, diagrams ready to explain you, conclusions already decided before the conversation even began. And they left realizing something that humbles even the loudest ego. Some people don't fit systems. Some people change them. Look at the wreckage behind them. The psychic couldn't stabilize you. The detective couldn't chart you. The CEO couldn't leverage you. 3 disciplines, 3 perspectives, 3 failures. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because you weren't designed to be understood from the outside. You don't operate on borrowed scripts. You don't respond on cue. You don't collapse where others expect collapse. You adapt, you recalibrate, you move. And that alone broke the framework they rely on to feel superior. They walked into this investigation thinking you were a puzzle waiting to be solved. They walked out realizing you were a shift in the room, a variable that changes the outcome simply by existing. 3 methods, 1 verdict. You don't follow the script, you flip it. And chosen ones, that's the part people never forgive you for. Not your strength, not your silence, but your refusal to play the role they assigned you. They aimed to break you. That was the intention, no matter how polished the language sounded. But every attempt hardened you in places they couldn't reach. Pressure didn't bend you, it refined you. Control didn't trap you, it woke you up. Manipulation didn't weaken you, it trained you to see through patterns faster than most people are comfortable with. You didn't win their game because winning would have meant staying inside it. You simply outgrew the board. And nothing terrifies insecure people more than someone who stops performing for them. Someone who no longer explains, no longer argues, no longer reacts on demand. Someone who exits the circus quietly and lets the spotlight collapse behind them. That's why they're still watching you, not with curiosity, but with fear. Fear of the moment the old version of you disappeared without a farewell. Fear of the calm in your voice now. Fear that your silence isn't uncertainty, it's certainty. They tell themselves stories to cope, that you'll slip, that you'll come back, that you'll need them again. But deep down, they know better. They feel it in the way you move now. You evolved past their reach, past their tactics, past the illusions they use to control others. You became unreachable, not because you built walls, but because you built clarity. And manipulators panic when they lose access to your emotions, because emotions were the only handle they ever had. Here's the twist they never anticipated. While they were hiring people to analyze you, you were quietly analyzing them. While they were trying to decode your silence, you were decoding their reactions to it. You watched how they behaved when they didn't get answers. You noticed who panicked, who projected, who tried to rewrite history to protect their pride. You learned which lies they tell themselves just to sleep at night. And you didn't need experts for that. You lived it. Chosen one, you didn't just survive their tactics, you outlived them. Their strategies expired. Their narratives aged poorly. Their assumptions collapsed under the weight of your growth. They should have analyzed their insecurities instead of your resilience. Because what unsettled them was never your mystery. It was the reflection you forced them to face. Standing near you made them aware of every corner they avoided within themselves. And people don't attack what's weak, they attack what exposes them. Now everything is on the table. No more speculation, no more smoke. The final cut is clean and sharp. They didn't uncover your weakness. They uncovered their limits. You were never the threat. You were the evolution they never prepared for. And that's why they keep their distance now, watching, waiting, hoping you stumble while knowing you won't. Number 9. The aftermath. When they understood, you were the shift, not the problem. You didn't disrupt the system. You exposed how fragile it already was. This is what it looks like after the dust settles. Chosen ones. Not fireworks, not applause, silence. The heavy kind. The kind that hangs in the air after people realize they misread the entire situation. This is the aftermath, the moment your enemies finally understand that you were never the issue they needed to solve. You were the change they weren't prepared to adapt to. Notice how everything went quiet after that room emptied. No more investigations, no more experts, no more whispered plans behind closed doors. Because once the truth landed, there was nothing left to chase. They didn't figure you out. They figured themselves out, and that realization was far more uncomfortable than any answer about you. Chosen ones, this is where your power becomes undeniable. Not because you did something loud, dramatic, or confrontational, but because you didn't. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't explain. You didn't correct their assumptions. You let reality do the work. And reality has a way of humiliating people who rely on illusion. After the psychic couldn't label you, the detective couldn't map you, and the CEO couldn't leverage you, the narrative collapsed. The story they told about you, the one where you were unstable, emotional, replaceable, no longer had an audience. Even they couldn't believe it anymore, because every attempt to define you only highlighted what they lacked: adaptability, depth, self-control, independence. Here's the part they don't talk about. Afterward, they didn't feel victorious. They felt exposed, because when someone like you walks away intact, it forces a brutal comparison. You lost things too. You were tested too. You were pushed too. The difference is you transformed while they stayed stuck rehearsing the same tactics on different people, hoping the outcome would change. You became the proof that pressure doesn't break everyone. Some people metabolize it. Some people refine themselves in isolation. Some people don't come back weaker after silence. They come back precise. And that realization is deeply unsettling to anyone who built their sense of superiority on the idea that others would eventually crack. Maybe you've noticed the shift already. The way certain people avoid your eyes now, the way conversations stop when you enter the room, the way confidence turns into caution around you. That's not intimidation. That's recognition. On some level, they understand you're not operating from the same emotional economy anymore. You're not bargaining for approval. You're not negotiating your boundaries. You're not seeking permission to exist as you are. Chosen ones, this is the quiet victory, not domination, but detachment, not revenge, but irrelevance. You didn't need to prove them wrong because time did it for you. Growth did it for you. Your calm did it for you. And now they're left sitting with the aftermath, trying to explain why the person they underestimated didn't fall apart like the script said they would. You might wonder, why do they still watch me if they know they were wrong? Because understanding doesn't erase insecurity. It amplifies it. They watch because they're trying to predict what they can no longer influence. They watch because your existence challenges the shortcuts they took. They watch because you represent a path they didn't choose. The harder one, the quieter one, the one that demands accountability. And here's the truth that lands hardest. You didn't change to punish them. You changed because you had to survive yourself. The evolution wasn't strategic. It was necessary. But now that it's done, now that you're standing on the other side, it reads like power, controlled, composed, untouchable. The aftermath isn't dramatic, it's revealing. People start revising their memories, softening their insults, pretending they always knew you were capable. But you know better. You remember who dismissed you when you were quiet, who doubted you when you withdrew, who mistook your restraint for weakness. Chosen ones, let this settle in. You were never meant to fit into their framework. You were the stress test that showed where it cracked. You weren't a problem to be solved. You were a shift that forced recalibration. And once that becomes clear, the game ends. No more moves, no more leverage, no more access. This is the aftermath. Not chaos, but clarity. Not noise, but authority. You didn't need the last word. You became the final result. And now, as we step out of this story and back into our own lives, let this truth settle in. You were never here to be understood by everyone. You were here to grow, to shift, and to move forward without needing permission. If this message resonated with you, support this work by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who needs this reminder. Drop 77 in the comments as a sign that you're locked in and moving with intention. Stay connected, stay steady, and keep choosing your growth.